January 1998. A frigid stillness settles over Washington, D.C. as a light snow dusts the manicured grounds of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. From beyond the iron gates, the White House glows under the cold winter moon, a beacon of stability and power. Its neoclassical facade, with its iconic Ionic columns and perfectly symmetrical windows, projects an image of unwavering integrity and historical weight. Each illuminated room seems to hold the spirit of the nation itself, a testament to the solemn duties performed within. This is more than a residence. It is the ultimate symbol of American democracy, the physical embodiment of the presidency. For over 2 centuries, it has stood as the stage for world-changing decisions, a fortress of principle where the fate of millions is debated and decided. To the outside world, it represents order, dignity, and an unbreakable connection to the nation's highest ideals. Yet within these hallowed walls, a different kind of history has unfolded, one far removed from public view and official records. Imagine the year 1921. The air in a small office adjacent to the president's desk, thick with the scent of cigar smoke and a woman's perfume. The click of a closet door closing on a hastily shared secret. Picture 1962, where the sounds of laughter and splashing water from a private indoor swimming pool offer a stark contrast to the nuclear tension gripping the world outside. Leap forward to 1995, to the charged silence of the Oval Office after dark. A young intern and the most powerful man on earth caught in a moment of profound recklessness. These are not isolated incidents, but echoes in a long corridor of secrets. Moments when the immense pressures of the office gave way to the vulnerabilities of the men who held it, all concealed by the very institution meant to protect them. This building is therefore a repository of 2 parallel histories. One is the official narrative, the story of bills signed, treaties negotiated, and solemn addresses delivered to the nation. It is the history taught in textbooks, a chronicle of leadership and public service. But there is another, more clandestine history, one that exists in the whispers of the resident staff, in redacted Secret Service logs, and in sworn testimony that shocked the world. This is the story of how the mansion's private quarters, the guest bedrooms, the secluded studies, and even the utilitarian closets became stages for human frailty and the abuse of power. It is an investigation into the profound divide between the public persona and the private person, revealing what truly happened in the president's bedrooms when the nation was looking the other way. If you believe that a true understanding of history requires examining the complex and often uncomfortable truths behind the monuments, then this channel is for you. We invite you to subscribe and join our community of historical investigators, dedicated to uncovering the stories that are rarely told. By leaving a like on this video, you help support this research and allow more people to discover this critical dimension of our past. Please take a moment to comment below and let us know where you are watching from. It is a powerful reminder that a passion for unfiltered history connects us across the globe. Now, to truly comprehend how such secrets could be kept within the most scrutinized building on Earth, we must first meet the men whose desires and decisions shaped this hidden history. Warren Gamaliel Harding, the 29th President of the United States, was born on November 2nd, 1865, and served from 1921 until his death in office on August 2nd, 1923. A Republican from Ohio, he won the presidency in a landslide by promising a return to normalcy after the trauma of the First World War. To a weary nation, Harding looked the part. He was handsome, silver-haired, and possessed an affable, neighborly charm that put people at ease. His very presence seemed to project stability and calm. He represented a deliberate retreat from the global stage and the ambitious reforms of the progressive era. In the public imagination, he was the steady hand America needed to guide it back to a simpler, more prosperous time. This carefully cultivated image of presidential gravitas, however, concealed a man wholly unprepared for the burdens and temptations of the office he had so overwhelmingly won. Beneath the dignified exterior was a man of profound weakness. Contemporaries noted Harding's chronic indecisiveness and an almost desperate yearning to be liked by everyone he met. One journalist famously summarized him not as a bad man, but simply as a very average one, tragically misplaced in a position demanding greatness. This pathological need for approval made him highly susceptible to influence, particularly from the cronies and corrupt officials he brought with him to Washington. More dangerously, it left him with little internal defense against his own impulses. He lacked the self-discipline to resist temptation, whether it was a poker game with his friends or the advances of a young woman. His desire to please extended to himself, often at the expense of his duties and his marriage. This fundamental flaw in his character was not created by the White House. It was merely amplified by the power and isolation it afforded. Harding's behavior in the White House was not an aberration, but a continuation of a well-established pattern. Long before his presidency, he engaged in numerous extramarital affairs, demonstrating a consistent recklessness in his personal life. The most notorious of these was his long-term relationship with Carrie Fulton Phillips, the wife of a close friend. This affair became so serious that Phillips successfully blackmailed the future president, receiving thousands of dollars and a luxurious trip to Japan in exchange for her silence during the 1920 presidential campaign. His motivation was a potent combination of a high libido and a staggering lack of foresight. He operated under the assumption that his charm and position would shield him from consequences. The White House, with its layers of security and controlled access, did not present a barrier to this behavior, but rather the ultimate private playground to indulge it with perceived impunity. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd president, was born on January 30th, 1882, and led the nation from 1933 until his death in office on April 12, 1945. His presidency spanned two of the greatest crises in American history, the Great Depression and the Second World War. To millions, FDR was more than a president. He was a source of hope and paternal strength, his confident voice on the radio a beacon in dark times. His personal battle with polio, which left him unable to walk unassisted, forged in him an immense inner resolve and a powerful sense of empathy for the suffering. Yet this same struggle also cultivated a belief in his own exceptionalism, a conviction that the ordinary rules of conduct did not necessarily apply to a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. This duality would define both his public triumphs and his private life. The emotional core of Roosevelt's secret life was the state of his marriage to Eleanor. While their union was a formidable political partnership, it had been emotionally fractured since 1918, when Eleanor discovered a packet of love letters from her social secretary, Lucy Mercer. The discovery was devastating. Though they agreed to remain married to preserve Franklin's political career, their intimate relationship effectively ended. They came to lead largely separate lives, even within the confines of the White House. For FDR, the relationship with Lucy Mercer, which he rekindled years later, was not a casual fling, but a search for the emotional warmth and uncomplicated affection absent from his marriage. He used the power of his office to keep her close, arranging for her to have a front-row seat at his first inauguration, and most poignantly, ensuring she was with him in his final hours. Roosevelt's ability to maintain a decades-long affair was a direct extension of his absolute mastery over his public image. In an era before television, he performed one of the most successful deceptions in political history, hiding the true extent of his paralysis from the American public. He was rarely photographed in his wheelchair, and newsreels were carefully edited to show him standing or appearing to walk. This monumental feat was only possible because of an unspoken gentleman's agreement with the press. Reporters and photographers willingly collaborated in protecting the president's image, believing that exposing his physical vulnerability would weaken the nation during times of peril. This same code of silence extended to his personal life. The press corps knew about Lucy Mercer, but they never wrote about it. FDR's power was such that he could render inconvenient truths completely invisible to the public. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th president, was born on May 29, 1917, and his assassination on November 22, 1963, cut short a presidency that came to be known as Camelot. He was a symbol of youth, vigor, and a new generation of American leadership. His legendary charisma, sharp intellect, and telegenic family captivated the world, projecting an image of glamour and idealism onto the White House. He and his wife Jacqueline represented a modern, sophisticated vision for the nation, a stark contrast to the staid Eisenhower years. This carefully constructed myth of a fairy tale presidency was a powerful political tool, inspiring millions and defining an era. But behind the shimmering facade of Camelot, the president himself was driven by compulsions and a sense of entitlement that stood in shocking opposition to the public persona he so effortlessly projected to an adoring world. Kennedy's private behavior was marked by an almost pathological recklessness. This was rooted in an upbringing of immense privilege and the influence of his father, Joseph P. Kennedy, a notorious philanderer who instilled in his sons a predatory and entitled attitude toward women. Compounding this was JFK's lifelong struggle with severe health problems, including Addison's disease and chronic back pain, which he concealed from the public. Living with the constant knowledge that his life could be cut short at any moment may have fueled a compulsive need for instant gratification. For Kennedy, sexual conquest and the exercise of power appeared to be inextricably linked. It was not merely a private failing, but an expression of an ingrained belief that his position, his charm, and his family's power placed him beyond the reach of conventional morality and consequences. William Jefferson Clinton, the 42nd president, born on August 19, 1946, presided over an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity from 1993 to 2001. A political prodigy from Arkansas, he possessed a brilliant mind, a deep well of empathy, and a masterful ability to connect with ordinary people. He was one of the most gifted politicians of his generation. Yet, his presidency was defined as much by scandal as by policy. Clinton embodied a striking duality, a remarkable capacity to compartmentalize his life. He could toggle between the solemn duties of the commander-in-chief and intensely risky private behavior with a facility that baffled his allies and enraged his enemies. This internal division was not a secret flaw, but a public spectacle, as allegations of sexual misconduct had followed him throughout his entire political ascent, creating a persistent shadow over his accomplishments. The scandal that would lead to his impeachment was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of a long-standing pattern of behavior. Allegations had dogged him for years, from Gennifer Flowers' claims during the 1992 campaign to the sexual harassment lawsuit filed by Paula Jones, a former Arkansas state employee. These were not mere rumors, but sworn statements that painted a picture of a man who repeatedly used his position of power to initiate sexual encounters. Biographers and psychologists point to a complex mix of factors driving this behavior: a degree of narcissism, a deep-seated need for affirmation that his political success could not satisfy, and a reckless impulse to constantly test boundaries. He seemed to court danger, taking risks that were not only personally self-destructive, but that also threatened the very institution he was elected to lead, all for the sake of momentary gratification. Unlike his predecessors, Clinton operated in a radically transformed landscape where secrets were nearly impossible to keep. The deferential gentleman's agreement that had protected Roosevelt and Kennedy was long dead, replaced by an aggressive post-Watergate media culture, driven by the relentless demands of the 24-hour news cycle and the burgeoning power of the Internet. Rumors that once might have been confined to Washington gossip columns could now circle the globe in an instant. Furthermore, his political opponents saw his personal conduct not as a private matter, but as a legitimate political weapon. This convergence of personal recklessness with a hostile political environment and an insatiable media created the perfect storm. The investigation by independent counsel Kenneth Starr would ultimately turn a clandestine affair into a full-blown constitutional crisis, demonstrating that while the transgressions were old, the consequences had become devastatingly new. The story of the White House begins not with a president, but with a plot of land and a bold idea. On October 13, 1792, the cornerstone was laid for a building intended to house the leader of a new republic. The winning design came from James Hoban, an Irish-born architect who envisioned a refined and elegant neoclassical mansion inspired by Leinster House in his native Dublin. This was not to be a king's palace, ostentatious and remote, but a residence that balanced the dignity of the office with the accessible ideals of a democracy. It was an architectural gamble, rising from the marshy banks of the Potomac River as part of a capital city being willed into existence. This structure of Virginia sandstone was designed to be the physical heart of a nation still inventing itself, a symbol of permanence in a world of revolutionary change. The initial cost of the President's House was $232,372, a figure that translates to roughly $5 million in modern currency. Yet this simple conversion fails to capture the true scale of the investment. In an era when a skilled craftsman earned about $1 a day, this sum was astronomical, enough to fund a small army or construct an entire town from scratch. This grand vision was realized through the arduous labor of a diverse workforce. Enslaved African Americans quarried and laid the stone, Scottish immigrants carved the intricate decorations, and Irish and Italian artisans worked the wood and plaster. A stark contrast existed from the very beginning, a monument to freedom and democracy being built by the hands of men who were not free, their sweat and toil embedded in the very foundations of the executive mansion. The first resident, John Adams, moved into the still unfinished structure on November 1st, 1800, finding it cold and cavernous. But the mansion's most profound trial by fire came just 14 years later. In August of 1814, during the war with Great Britain, British forces captured Washington and set the building ablaze, leaving only a charred and blackened stone shell. This act of destruction was a deep symbolic wound to the young nation. The decision to rebuild on the same site and to paint the smoke-stained walls a brilliant white was an act of national defiance. It transformed the building from a mere residence into a powerful symbol of American resilience. From its ashes rose not just a house, but an icon, its white facade now representing survival, endurance, and the unshakable continuity of the Republic. The architectural genius of the White House lies in its fundamental duality, a deliberate separation of the public and the private spheres. The ground floor and the state floor were conceived as the nation's ceremonial stage. Here in the East Room, the Blue Room, and the State Dining Room, the business of the Republic is performed. These spaces are designed to inspire awe, with their soaring ceilings, gilded accents, and historical portraits, meant to impress foreign leaders and project an image of American strength and sophistication. This is the official face of the presidency, a meticulously curated environment where every reception, every state dinner, and every bill signing is a piece of political theater. This public domain is where the history recorded in textbooks is made, under the watchful eyes of the press and the public. But a different world exists just one flight of stairs above the public pageantry. The second and third floors constitute the executive residence, a realm of almost absolute privacy reserved for the first family. This is not merely an architectural separation. It is a profound psychological boundary. When a president and their family ascend the grand staircase and pass into these private quarters, they step off the public stage. This secluded domain, with its bedrooms, sitting rooms, and solarium, is designed to be a sanctuary from the relentless pressures of the office. It is here, shielded from the cameras and the crowds, that the official persona can be shed. This division creates a space where an entirely different kind of history can unfold, one that is intimate, unscripted, and completely hidden from the nation's view. The addition of the West Wing in 1902 under President Theodore Roosevelt was intended to further enforce this separation, moving the presidential workspace out of the family home. While this created a more efficient executive office, it also established a point of critical vulnerability, the West Colonnade. This covered walkway, connecting the Oval Office directly to the executive residence, became a discreet bridge between the president's two worlds. In less than a minute, a president could walk from the most scrutinized office on the planet to the complete seclusion of their private quarters. This dangerous proximity, designed for convenience, would later be exploited, allowing private visitors to be summoned to the seat of power without navigating the formal public entrances of the mansion, creating a pathway for secrets to travel unseen. The Oval Office itself is a masterclass in layered design, a public stage with a secret backstage. Its iconic shape and presidential seal make it the ultimate symbol of American authority, a room where the fate of the world is decided. Yet, Hidden in plain sight is its true design. Adjoining the famous room is a small private study and a personal bathroom, an inner sanctum accessible only to the president and their most trusted confidants. This architectural feature provides a bubble of absolute privacy within the storm of constant observation. It is a space for quiet contemplation, for top-secret phone calls and, as the Clinton administration would later reveal, for clandestine encounters. The very design of the world's most powerful room acknowledged the need for a place to escape, inadvertently creating the perfect venue for transgression. However, scandal does not always require grand architecture. It often thrives in the mundane. The infamous closet used by Warren G. Harding was not a hidden chamber from a spy novel, but a simple, utilitarian coat closet in a small office adjacent to the Oval Office of his era. Its effectiveness as a location for his trysts with Nan Britton lay precisely in its ordinariness. No one would question the president stepping into a closet for a moment. This demonstrates a crucial principle of White House secrecy. It often leverages the banal and the overlooked. The mansion's labyrinth of corridors, storage rooms, and forgotten corners provided a landscape of opportunity for a president inclined to use it, proving that the most effective hiding place is often the one that no one thinks to look at twice. The more opulent spaces of the private residence offered a different kind of sanctuary. The Lincoln bedroom, located on the second floor, is one of the most prestigious guest suites in the world. Its position within the strictly controlled family quarters made it an ideal location for John F. Kennedy's secret rendezvous. Access to the second floor is tightly managed by the Secret Service, limited to family, high-level staff, and vetted guests. This security apparatus, designed to protect the first family from intrusion, was easily subverted by the president himself. By ordering his aides to grant access to his mistresses, Kennedy turned the security system into his personal concierge service. The very mechanism meant to ensure his safety was repurposed to guarantee his secrecy, transforming a National Historic Room into a private presidential suite. This highlights the central paradox of White House security. The entire complex is a fortress, equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance and staffed by the world's most elite protection agency. Yet, the Secret Service serves at the pleasure of the president. Their primary mission is to protect the person of the president, and they are bound to follow his orders. If a president commands an agent to admit a guest under a pseudonym or to look the other way, they are expected to comply. This ultimate authority means the president can effectively disable the security meant to protect the institution. Over the decades, as technology evolved with private phone lines, secure elevators, and encrypted communication, each innovation designed for security also provided a new tool to ensure personal privacy and facilitate clandestine behavior. The mansion underwent its most dramatic transformation between 1949 and 1952 under President Harry S. Truman. Deemed structurally unsound, the entire interior of the building was gutted, leaving only the exterior walls standing. A new steel frame and modern infrastructure were installed, essentially creating a new, more secure building within the historic shell. This massive undertaking reinforced the mansion's layered nature, modernizing its systems of access control and internal separation. The new White House was safer, more efficient, and even more of a controlled environment than before. Its zones of access were more clearly defined, its internal communications were more secure, and its ability to function as both a public monument and a private fortress was perfected for the modern age. Ultimately, the White House is far more than stone, steel, and paint. It is an architecture of power, an environment deliberately engineered to support the dual existence of its primary resident. Each design choice, from the grand layout of the state floor to the discreet location of a private study, reinforces the deep divide between the public symbol and the private man. The building is a physical manifestation of the presidency itself, a transparent institution built around an opaque core of executive privilege. Over 2 centuries, this stage was meticulously constructed, rebuilt, and refined, creating the perfect setting for the collision of national destiny and personal desire. The only element missing was the cast of characters whose human dramas would play out within its heavily guarded, yet surprisingly vulnerable, walls. To operate the White House is to command a small disciplined army, numbering over 400 full-time employees, all dedicated to the seamless functioning of both a national monument and a private home. Within this legion, an elite cadre of 96 individuals comprises the residence staff, a multi-generational team of ushers, butlers, chefs, and maids who serve as the silent custodians of the mansion's inner life. At the top of this hierarchy stands the chief usher, a position of immense trust and discretion, who orchestrates every detail from state dinners to the first family's breakfast. Below them, a world of specialized labor unfolds, florists arranging bouquets for the blue room, electricians maintaining century-old chandeliers, and carpenters preserving the historic fabric of the building. They are trained to be invisible, their movements synchronized to the rhythms of power, witnessing everything but speaking of nothing. Their loyalty is to the institution, not the individual, a silent pact of discretion that makes them the ultimate keepers of secrets. The official life of the White House runs with the precision of a Swiss watch, a daily ballet of power choreographed to the minute. The day begins in earnest around 8 in the morning with the President's daily brief, a solemn intelligence overview that sets the tone for the hours ahead. From there, the schedule is a relentless cascade of obligations. Meetings in the cabinet room, phone calls with world leaders from the Oval Office, bill signing ceremonies in the East Room, and press conferences in the Rose Garden. Every meal is served on time, every visitor is escorted with formal precision, and every public appearance is meticulously managed. This public rhythm is the heartbeat of the administration, a constant performance of competence and control broadcast to the world. It is a machine designed to project an image of unwavering order, where every action is deliberate, documented, and part of the official historical record, leaving no room for spontaneity or private deviation. The public face of the White House is most brilliantly displayed during its grand social events, meticulously staged productions of American power and culture. A state dinner, for instance, is the pinnacle of this theater, hosting over 100 guests in the state dining room. The protocol is rigid. Guests arrive to the sounds of the Marine Band, adhere to a strict dress code of black tie or evening gowns, and navigate a minefield of diplomatic etiquette. The cost of a single such evening can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, a national investment in soft power. Everything is designed for the cameras and the history books, from the bespoke floral arrangements to the multi-course menu celebrating American cuisine. These events, covered breathlessly by the press, project an image of sophistication, stability, and often an idealized vision of the first family presiding over the nation's most important social functions with grace and impeccable decorum. Maintaining this theater of power required a staggering financial commitment funded entirely by the American taxpayer. In the early 20th century, the annual budget for the mansion's operations was already in the tens of thousands of dollars, a sum capable of building dozens of private homes. By the Kennedy era, this had swelled significantly, and by the end of the century, the operational costs ran into the millions annually. These funds covered everything from the salaries of the extensive resident staff to the enormous utility bills for heating and cooling 55,000 square feet of space. The budget for state entertainment alone was a line item that dwarfed the incomes of most citizens. This immense public expenditure reinforced the idea that the White House was not a private residence, but a national asset, a piece of public property whose upkeep and activities were a matter of legitimate national interest and scrutiny, underscoring the high stakes of its use for purely private purposes. For much of the 20th century, the public reputation of the White House was carefully curated and fiercely protected, presented to the American people as a bastion of moral rectitude. Magazines like Life and the Saturday Evening Post published glowing photo essays depicting idyllic family scenes, the Kennedys sailing off Hyannisport, or the Roosevelts gathered at Hyde Park. Newspapers of record, such as the New York Times, adhered to an unwritten rule, focusing exclusively on policy and public appearances while ignoring personal rumors. A visitor in the 1960s might write home describing the mansion as a place of almost sacred history, where one felt the presence of Lincoln in the halls. This narrative portrayed the White House not just as the seat of government, but as the nation's home, a symbol of the very best of American family values, presided over by a first family that was, in the public's imagination, beyond reproach. The mansion's guest list was a testament to its central place on the world stage, a revolving door of the most influential figures of the age. Queen Elizabeth, Winston Churchill, Albert Einstein, and countless heads of state have walked its halls, each visit a carefully managed diplomatic event. These distinguished guests, along with the thousands of ordinary citizens who took public tours each week, were shown a very specific and calculated version of the White House. They would marvel at the scale of the East Room, the largest in the House where treaties were signed and presidents had lain in state. They would admire the distinct oval shape and French-inspired decor of the Blue Room, the formal reception space. They saw the grand portraits of past presidents in the state dining room. This curated experience was designed to inspire awe and reinforce a sense of historical continuity and unimpeachable grandeur. A public face of solemn duty and national pride. Governing the behavior within the White House was a complex code of conduct, a mixture of written protocol and unwritten yet rigidly enforced traditions. The most fundamental rule, particularly for the resident staff, was absolute discretion. To speak of what one saw or heard within the private quarters was the ultimate betrayal, a violation that would result in immediate dismissal and permanent disgrace. Formalities were strictly observed. One did not speak to the president unless spoken to first, and movement through the halls was quiet and unobtrusive. An atmosphere of reverence for the institution permeated every action, from the polishing of silver to the answering of a telephone. This code was designed to protect the dignity of the office, creating a bubble of decorum around its occupant. It established a clear line between the powerful and the powerless, a line that the presidents themselves were uniquely positioned to cross at will. Each day, at a specific moment, the character of the White House would undergo a profound transformation. The signal often came around 6 in the evening, with the announcement of a call lid to the press corps, a declaration that the president's public schedule for the day was concluded. This was the cue for the official machinery to begin powering down. The hum of the West Wing would subside as hundreds of staffers departed for the day. The clatter of cameras and the shouted questions of reporters would vanish from the North Lawn. Inside the mansion, the lights in the public tour areas would be dimmed, and a deep silence would begin to settle over the grand, empty corridors of the state floor. It was as if the building itself took a deep breath, exhaling the immense pressure of public scrutiny and retreating into a different, more enigmatic state of being, preparing for the night ahead. As darkness fell, the human geography of the mansion shifted dramatically. The vast majority of the 400-person staff departed, leaving behind only a skeleton crew for the overnight hours. This smaller, more intimate team consisted of the most trusted members of the resident staff, a few butlers, housekeepers, and chefs on night duty, along with the ever-present Secret Service detail. Doors that stood open all day were now closed and locked. The security posture, once focused on managing crowds and official visitors, now reoriented to ensure absolute privacy and seclusion for the first family. Agents who had spent the day scanning for external threats now controlled internal access with heightened vigilance. The executive residence, in effect, became a fortress within a fortress, sealed off not only from the outside world, but from the rest of the White House itself, a private kingdom ruled by its sole occupant. This nightly transformation effectively created 2 White Houses, occupying the exact same physical space, but existing in entirely different moral and psychological universes. By day, it was the People's House, a bustling center of democratic governance, a symbol of transparency and public service where history was made before the eyes of the world. Its halls echoed with the business of the nation. But after the call lid was issued and the last staffer departed, it became something else entirely. A private palace, a secluded sanctuary where the president was not a public servant, but a master in his own domain. It was in this second, nocturnal White House, shielded by protocol and protected by the very agents sworn to defend the institution, that an entirely different kind of history could be written, far from the official record, and hidden within the shadowed corners of the world's most famous home. The hidden history of the White House is not a matter of rumor or speculation. It is built upon a foundation of primary source documents that have, over time, brought these secrets into the light. The story of Warren G. Harding's affair rests on the explosive 1927 memoir by his mistress Nan Britton, titled The President's Daughter, and a collection of his passionate letters to another mistress, Carrie Fulton Phillips, unsealed in 2014. Franklin Roosevelt's long relationship with Lucy Mercer is documented in letters discovered after her death and corroborated by the memoirs of their children and close aides. The extent of John F. Kennedy's recklessness is pieced together from declassified Secret Service logs, tell-all books by former agents, the sworn testimony of his lovers like Judith Campbell Exner, and the detailed 2012 memoir of White House intern Mimi Alford. Finally, the Clinton-Lewinsky affair is meticulously detailed in the thousands of pages of the Starr Report, an official government investigation that includes grand jury testimony, phone records, and physical evidence. These sources, when studied collectively, reveal a consistent pattern of behavior enabled by the unique architecture and power structure of the presidency. While each case is distinct, they all share a common thread: the leveraging of the institution itself to facilitate and conceal private transgressions. The mechanisms of secrecy were not elaborate spycraft, but rather the exploitation of existing systems. It involved the direct command of Secret Service agents, the complicity of loyal aides who valued personal loyalty over institutional integrity, and the use of the mansion's physical layout, its private quarters, hidden studies, and even mundane closets, as a personal playground. The system was not a formal conspiracy, but an unspoken understanding that the president's desires were paramount, and that the resources of the state could be marshaled to serve them, effectively turning the White House from a public trust into a private fiefdom for the man who occupied it. It is crucial, however, to acknowledge the limits of the historical record. While documents and testimonies provide a framework, the precise emotional and psychological dynamics of these relationships often remain elusive. We can read Harding's letters, but we cannot fully know the complex mix of affection and coercion in his affairs. We can document Kennedy's many encounters, but the full impact on the women involved is often left to their own later accounts, which are themselves filtered through memory and time. What is not in dispute, and what academic consensus confirms, is that for nearly 80 years, a series of presidents used the power and privacy of the White House to engage in extramarital affairs. The debate among historians is not whether these events happened, but rather how they should be interpreted: as private moral failings, as abuses of power, or as symptoms of a presidency that dangerously isolates its occupants from conventional accountability. The affair between President Warren G. Harding and Nan Britton began long before he reached the White House, but it was within the executive mansion that it took its most audacious form. Their system was one of reckless opportunism. Britton, who was 31 years his junior, would be granted access to the White House grounds by presidential aides. The trysts themselves were brief and frantic, often occurring during the workday. According to Britton's own detailed account, their primary location was a small coat closet in a private office adjacent to the Oval Office. This space, no more than a few square feet, was chosen for its convenience and its banality. The President of the United States could step into a closet for a few minutes with a visitor, without arousing the suspicion that a trip to the private residence might. It was a system built on the assumption that no one would dare to question the President's movements within his own sanctum. The primary participants in this arrangement were Harding, Britton, and the Secret Service agents on duty. In her memoir, Britton describes the agents as being aware of her presence and purpose, acting as lookouts who would ensure the president was not disturbed. They were, in her telling, complicit facilitators, their duty to protect the president's person interpreted as a duty to protect his secrets. The frequency of these encounters, according to Britton, was startling, sometimes happening multiple times a week. The motivation for Harding was clearly a mix of long-standing affection and an almost compulsive sexual appetite. For Britton, it was a continuation of a relationship with a man she claimed to love, the father of her illegitimate child Elizabeth Ann Blazing. The power imbalance was immense: a young, financially dependent woman and the most powerful man in the country, their relationship playing out in the literal closets of power. The closet itself was a symbol of the affair, mundane, cramped, and hidden in plain sight. It was not a grand bedroom, but a utilitarian space, its very ordinariness providing the perfect cover. Britain wrote of their encounters there with a startling lack of romanticism, describing hurried, uncomfortable moments under the constant threat of discovery. This specific location underscores the nature of Harding's recklessness. He was not seeking emotional intimacy in a comfortable setting, but immediate gratification in the most convenient and therefore most dangerous place possible. The affair was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of infidelity. His decades-long relationship with Carrie Fulton Phillips, the wife of a close friend, was so serious that it required a hefty blackmail payment to keep it quiet during the 1920 campaign, a fact confirmed by the unsealing of his desperate, pleading letters to her. In stark contrast to Harding's frantic encounters, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's secret life revolved around a single enduring emotional connection with Lucy Mercer Rutherford. Their affair had been discovered by his wife, Eleanor, in 1918, nearly shattering their marriage. Though they remained together for political reasons, their intimate life was over. The system Roosevelt devised as president was not for fleeting sexual trysts, but for maintaining this deep clandestine bond. He used the full power of his office to orchestrate Lucy's presence in his life. He would arrange for her to visit the White House under a pseudonym, often with the assistance of his daughter, Anna Roosevelt, who acted as a gatekeeper and facilitator. These were not secret dashes into a closet, but carefully managed visits to the private residence, often lasting for days, where Lucy provided the emotional companionship he no longer found in his marriage. The participants in this decades-long secret were few but deeply involved. At the center were FDR and Lucy Mercer. The key facilitator was Anna Roosevelt, who sympathized with her father's loneliness and actively helped conceal the relationship from her mother, Eleanor. A small circle of trusted aides and Secret Service agents were also aware, tasked with managing Lucy's discreet arrivals and departures. The primary location for these meetings was the private quarters of the White House, a space where Eleanor's presence was often minimal, as she frequently traveled. Roosevelt also hosted Lucy at his private retreat in Warm Springs, Georgia, which he called the Little White House. It was here, in this secluded cottage, that their relationship found its most poignant and tragic expression, far from the official scrutiny of Washington, a sanctuary built with the resources of his office. The most dramatic event in this secret history occurred on April 12, 1945, at Warm Springs. Lucy Mercer was with the president when he suffered a massive cerebral hemorrhage. As his medical team fought to save his life, his aides launched a second, equally frantic operation to get Lucy away from the cottage before the press and, more importantly, before Eleanor Roosevelt arrived. She was rushed out of the compound by a trusted presidential aide, her presence at the president's death erased from the initial official narrative. It was a secret she and the Roosevelt inner circle would keep for over 2 decades. The fact that FDR chose to spend his final hours not with his wife, but with his long-term mistress, speaks volumes about the emotional reality of his private life, a reality that the power of the presidency had allowed him to construct and maintain until the very end. With John F. Kennedy, the system of secrecy evolved from maintaining a single relationship to managing a constant series of sexual encounters. The operation was systematic and brazen, orchestrated by his loyal aide and friend, Dave Powers. According to memoirs from former Secret Service agents and insiders, Powers' role was to procure women and facilitate their discreet entry into the White House. The Secret Service detail, bound by a code of protecting the president at all costs, was ordered to look the other way or actively assist. Agents were instructed to bypass standard security protocols for certain female visitors, who were often given code names. This turned the security apparatus of the executive mansion into a private concierge service for the president's libido. The scale was unprecedented, with reports of women being brought in multiple times a week, sometimes 2 at a time, for liaisons in various parts of the mansion. The participants in Kennedy's secret life were numerous and varied. They included Hollywood stars, society women, and, most disturbingly, young White House staffers and interns. Two cases stand out for their documented gravity. The first involves Judith Campbell Exner, who, as confirmed by later FBI files, was simultaneously the mistress of President Kennedy and mafia boss Sam Giancana, creating a catastrophic national security risk. The second involves Mimi Alford, a 19-year-old White House intern in the summer of 1962. In her detailed memoir, Alford describes being personally invited by Dave Powers to join the president for a swim in the White House's indoor pool, a frequent venue for these encounters. This invitation led to an 18-month affair that began when Kennedy seduced her in his wife's private bedroom. The power dynamic was absolute. The most powerful man in the world and a teenager utterly overwhelmed by his attention. The locations for Kennedy's affairs were spread throughout the private residence, transforming historic rooms into backdrops for his conquests. The indoor swimming pool, with its heated water and relative seclusion, was a favored spot for casual, often group encounters. The most prestigious guest suite, the Lincoln Bedroom, was also frequently used, a place of immense historical significance turned into a private boudoir. However, according to Mimi Alford's account, her first sexual encounter with the president took place in Jacqueline Kennedy's bedroom while the First Lady was away. Alford describes a president who was charming but also predatory, who took her virginity and then proceeded as if it were a routine perk of his office. Her story, corroborated by White House logs, provides a chilling first-hand account of how the glamour of Camelot concealed a deeply troubling pattern of behavior, enabled by a staff that saw its primary duty as satisfying the president's every whim. The final case, that of William Jefferson Clinton, brought these hidden histories erupting into public view. His affair with 22-year-old White House intern Monica Lewinsky was not facilitated by a complex network like Kennedy's, but was a product of dangerous proximity and personal recklessness. The system was simple. Lewinsky, who had been moved from her internship to a job in the East Wing, would make excuses to visit the West Wing to deliver documents. The president's personal secretary, Betty Curry, would then grant her access to the Oval Office. According to the Star report, Curry acted as the primary gatekeeper, managing Lewinsky's visits, fielding her calls, and helping to conceal the relationship. The encounters themselves took place in the very heart of American power, often during the workday, just feet from where the nation's most critical business was being conducted. It was a pattern of high-risk behavior in the most scrutinized location on Earth. The affair, as meticulously documented in the Star report, consisted of 9 specific sexual encounters between November 1995 and March 1997. The primary location was not a bedroom, but the private study and adjoining hallway connected to the Oval Office. This inner sanctum, a small, secluded space designed for private presidential work and reflection, became the stage for their trysts. Lewinsky's grand jury testimony described in graphic detail encounters that included oral sex, often while the president was on the phone conducting official business, including conversations with members of Congress. The infamous blue dress, stained with the president's semen, became the undeniable physical evidence that turned a private affair into a constitutional crisis. The use of this specific space highlights the profound compartmentalization Clinton was capable of, blending the duties of his office with personal gratification in a way that was both breathtakingly arrogant and ultimately self-destructive. The purpose of these encounters was, on one level, the fulfillment of mutual desire. However, the power imbalance was the defining characteristic of the relationship. Clinton was the President of the United States. Lewinsky was a young, emotionally vulnerable former intern. His motivation appears to have been a complex mix of narcissism, a need for adoration, and a lifelong pattern of reckless boundary testing. For Lewinsky, it was a consensual relationship with a man she was infatuated with, but one that existed entirely on his terms. The Star report makes it clear that the president used the symbols and privileges of his office to initiate and sustain the affair, from giving her personal gifts bearing the presidential seal to arranging a job for her to ensure her silence. It was a classic abuse of power, where the personal desires of a superior were fulfilled through the exploitation of a subordinate's admiration and vulnerability. The women at the center of these scandals were not abstract figures, but individuals whose lives were irrevocably altered by their proximity to power. Nan Britton spent the rest of her life fighting to have her daughter, Elizabeth Ann, recognized as Harding's child, publishing her scandalous memoir primarily to raise funds and prove her case. She was publicly vilified and dismissed as a liar for decades, dying in 1991, long before DNA evidence could have vindicated her. Her story is a testament to the social ruin that awaited women who dared to challenge the official narrative of a powerful man, a life defined by a secret that society refused to believe. She was left to carry the consequences of their shared actions entirely on her own. A footnote to a presidency remembered more for its corruption than for its compassion. Mimi Alford carried the secret of her affair with John F. Kennedy for over 40 years. In her memoir, she describes the profound psychological toll of the relationship, a loss of innocence that shaped her entire adult life. She wrote, "The affair was a demeaning experience. I was a pawn." She was not a willing participant in a glamorous romance, but a young woman swept into a situation she was emotionally unequipped to handle, her own desires and well-being entirely secondary to the president's gratification. Her story, and others like it, forces a re-evaluation of the Camelot myth, revealing the human cost of the president's compulsive behavior. The power he wielded was not just political, it was personal, capable of inflicting lasting emotional damage on those who fell into its orbit, their stories silenced by the very glamour that drew them in. Monica Lewinsky's fate was perhaps the most brutal. Unlike her predecessors, whose stories remained hidden for decades, her life was publicly dissected in real time. She became, in her own words, patient zero of losing a personal reputation on a global scale via the internet. The Star Report published the most intimate details of her life and testimony for the world to read. She was not treated as a victim of a powerful man's advances, but was relentlessly shamed, ridiculed and slut-shamed by the media, politicians and the public. Her experience exposed the savage hypocrisy of a culture that held a young woman almost entirely responsible for the actions of the most powerful man on the planet. Her life was nearly destroyed, not just by the affair but by the public spectacle that followed, a consequence far more devastating than any her partner in the affair would ever face. These three women, separated by decades, share a common narrative. They were all young, in positions of subordinate power, and involved with presidents who used the institution of the White House to facilitate these relationships. Nan Britton was a dependent mistress, Mimi Alford was a teenage intern, and Monica Lewinsky was a junior staffer. In each case, the president's actions were protected by a wall of institutional loyalty and secrecy, while the women were left to navigate the consequences alone. Their stories reveal the dark underside of presidential power, its ability to command not just armies and policies, but also the lives and reputations of private citizens, particularly women, who were drawn into its sphere. Their experiences are not mere footnotes to history. They are central to understanding the true nature of the power wielded within those famous white walls. The secrecy surrounding these affairs was ultimately a function of time and technology. Harding and Roosevelt operated in an era of almost total press deference. The gentleman's agreement was in full effect. A president's private life was considered off-limits, a private matter to be respected. Reporters who knew of Harding's womanizing or Roosevelt's relationship with Lucy Mercer simply did not write about it. This code of silence, born of a desire to protect the dignity of the office, effectively made the press a complicit partner in the concealment. Without the threat of exposure, these presidents were free to act with a sense of impunity, their secrets safe behind a wall of journalistic convention that would seem utterly alien to the modern world. This was the golden age of presidential privacy, an age that would not last. Kennedy's presidency marked a transitional period. The deference of the press largely held, but the sheer scale of his recklessness pushed the boundaries. Rumors were more widespread, and insiders like Dave Powers would later speak more openly about what had occurred. However, the Camelot myth was so powerful and the president so popular that the media remained largely captivated and unwilling to dig deeper. The real threat came not from journalists, but from law enforcement. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI meticulously documented Kennedy's affair with Judith Campbell Exner, including her connections to the mob. This information was not leaked to the press, but was held by Hoover as a source of immense personal power over the president, demonstrating that even if the public was kept in the dark, the secrets were known and could be weaponized within the hidden corridors of government. By the time Bill Clinton entered the White House, the landscape had been completely transformed. The Watergate scandal and the Vietnam War had shattered the trust between the press and the presidency, killing the gentleman's agreement forever. A new generation of journalists saw it as their duty to investigate the private lives of public officials. The rise of the 24-hour news cycle created an insatiable demand for content, and the advent of the internet meant that a rumor could circle the globe in minutes. Furthermore, Clinton's political opponents, led by the investigation of independent counsel Kenneth Starr, saw his personal conduct not as a private failing, but as a legitimate political weapon. This convergence of a reckless president, an aggressive media, and a hostile political opposition created the perfect storm that ensured his secrets could not be contained. Ultimately, the story of these White House scandals is the story of a loss of innocence, both for the individuals involved and for the nation itself. It traces the evolution of the presidency from a revered, almost monarchical institution shielded by a deferential press to a deeply humanized and scrutinized office laid bare by a relentless media and partisan warfare. The affairs of Harding, Roosevelt, and Kennedy were largely secrets kept from their contemporary public, their full details only emerging decades later through the work of historians. Clinton's affair, by contrast, unfolded as a live global spectacle, culminating in a public impeachment trial that forced the nation to confront the uncomfortable intersection of private morality and public duty. The walls of the White House, once capable of containing any secret, had become transparent. The crisis for Warren G. Harding never erupted from his sexual indiscretions during his lifetime. It was a slow, posthumous burn. The mechanisms of secrecy were formidable, a combination of social taboo and the fierce protection of his wife, Florence, who methodically burned the majority of his personal papers after his death to sanitize his legacy. When Nan Britton published her tell-all memoir in 1927, 4 years after Harding's death, the establishment rallied to discredit her. She was labeled a hysterical liar and a blackmailer. The public, still viewing the presidency with reverence, largely sided with the official narrative. His personal scandals were effectively suppressed, overshadowed by the more tangible corruption of the Teapot Dome scandal that was consuming his administration. Consequently, the financial and political costs of his affairs were deferred, becoming a matter for historians rather than a crisis for a sitting president, proving that in that era, institutional power could successfully outlast personal truth. Harding's death on August 2, 1923, at the age of 57, was both a personal tragedy and a political deliverance. The official cause was a stroke, but the circumstances were clouded in suspicion. He died suddenly in a San Francisco hotel room while on a cross-country tour designed to escape the mounting pressures of the Teapot Dome investigation. His health was known to be fragile, undoubtedly exacerbated by the immense stress of governing, the constant fear of his affairs being exposed, and the betrayals of the corrupt cronies he had appointed. His death effectively ended the escalating crisis. It spared him the near certainty of impeachment proceedings over political corruption, not personal morality. As a result, he was mourned as a beloved leader who died in service to his country, receiving a state funeral that cemented a heroic public image, his most damaging secrets safely buried with him for decades to come. For Franklin Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy, the crisis was not a public explosion, but a constant managed state of private risk. Their secrets were kept not through suppression after the fact, but through the active complicity of the institutions around them. The gentleman's agreement with a deferential press corps ensured that rumors about Lucy Mercer or JFK's rampant womanizing never saw print. More critically, the Secret Service and trusted aides acted as facilitators, their loyalty directed to the man rather than the office. This system of silence had a corrosive institutional cost. It transformed protectors into enablers and turned the apparatus of national security into a tool for personal gratification. The most severe consequence was the staggering national security risk created by Kennedy's affair with Judith Campbell Exner, who was simultaneously involved with mafia boss Sam Giancana, a secret held not by the press, but by a watchful J. Edgar Hoover. The deaths of these two presidents brought their secret lives to a definitive, yet starkly different, conclusion. When Franklin Roosevelt suffered his fatal stroke on April 12, 1945, the immediate crisis for his inner circle was spiriting Lucy Mercer away from his deathbed before his wife Eleanor arrived. The secret was successfully kept from the public for another 2 decades, but its discovery by Eleanor inflicted a final, profound personal wound. John F. Kennedy's assassination on November 22, 1963, had the opposite effect. His violent, premature death did not expose his secrets, but sanctified them, freezing his image in time as a youthful martyr. The tragedy cemented the myth of Camelot, making any subsequent revelation about his personal recklessness seem tasteless or traitorous. In death, he achieved a level of immunity that no amount of presidential power could have guaranteed him in life, postponing a true reckoning for generations. The crisis for Bill Clinton, however, ignited in a world where such immunity was no longer possible. It began on January 17, 1998, when the nascent online Drudge Report published the explosive news that Newsweek was holding back. The president had engaged in a sexual affair with a White House intern. The mechanism of revelation was devastatingly modern. It was not a posthumous memoir, but a set of secretly recorded audio tapes made by a colleague named Linda Tripp, which were handed directly to independent counsel Kenneth Starr. His federally funded investigation, originally focused on an old real estate deal, now had a new explosive mandate. The evidence was immediate, technologically captured, and delivered into a media ecosystem defined by a 24-hour news cycle and partisan warfare. The era of presidential privacy, protected by a deferential press, was officially over, replaced by an era of total relentless exposure. The consequences of this exposure were immediate, political, and constitutional. President Clinton's decision to deny the affair, both in a sworn deposition for the Paula Jones lawsuit and on national television, where he famously wagged his finger and stated, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman," transformed a personal failing into a legal crisis. This denial became the foundation for charges of perjury and obstruction of justice. The political fallout was catastrophic, consuming his administration for over a year. On December 19, 1998, the House of Representatives voted to impeach him, making him only the second president in American history to face a trial in the Senate. The crisis had escalated far beyond the act itself. It was now a battle over the rule of law, the definition of truth, and whether a president could use the power of his office to conceal personal misconduct. While the Senate ultimately acquitted Clinton in February of 1999, the costs of the scandal were staggering and permanent. The official investigation cost the American taxpayers over $70 million. Politically, the impeachment process poisoned the well of American politics, deepening partisan divides into a chasm of mutual hatred that has defined the subsequent decades. Socially, the crisis saturated the public discourse with graphic sexual details from the Starr Report, eroding the dignity of the presidential office and blurring the line between public duty and private life. It normalized the use of personal scandal as a primary political weapon, creating a new, more brutal set of rules for public life. A series of reckless private decisions made in a small study off the Oval Office had inflicted a lasting trauma on the nation's political institutions and civic trust. The ultimate consequence of these scandals, from Harding's buried secrets to Clinton's public trial, was the fundamental and irreversible transformation of the White House itself in the public imagination. It was no longer perceived as a sacred space, a pristine symbol of American democracy and integrity. The detailed revelations had mapped its private quarters, its closets, bedrooms, and studies, as sites of human frailty and abuse of power. The institution's protective mystique was shattered forever. The presidency was dragged down from a pedestal and irrevocably humanized, its occupants no longer seen as figures of unimpeachable character, but as deeply flawed individuals. This loss of a shared national illusion was the final lasting legacy, replacing a reverent public trust with the cynical, hypercritical gaze that now defines the relationship between the American people and the office of the president. Following the constitutional earthquake of the Clinton impeachment, the White House as an institution entered a new era of heightened scrutiny. Physically, however, its primary function continued uninterrupted, a testament to the resilience of the office itself. The most significant changes in the succeeding decades were not architectural but operational, with security protocols dramatically intensified following the attacks of September 11, 2001, transforming the surrounding grounds into a fortified zone. The mansion remains the property of the American people, managed by the National Park Service, but its core purpose is to serve the presidency. The Truman-era reconstruction of 1952 remains the building's defining feature, a modern steel skeleton supporting the interior, hidden within the original iconic sandstone walls. This constant process of preservation and reinforcement ensures that while presidents and their legacies are transient, the stage on which they act is maintained as a permanent symbol of the nation, its structure more robust than ever before. Today, the White House is a living museum, yet access to its most private histories is impossible. Public tours, when available, are strictly limited to the ceremonial rooms on the ground and state floors, such as the East Room and the Blue Room. The sites of the scandals are almost entirely inaccessible or have been erased by time. The small study adjoining the Oval Office, where President Clinton and Monica Lewinsky met, is deep within the West Wing's secure area and never seen by the public. The coat closet used by President Harding no longer exists in its original form due to subsequent renovations. The Lincoln bedroom, used by President Kennedy for his trysts, remains part of the private executive residence, off-limits to all but the first family and their personal guests. Most dramatically, the indoor swimming pool where Kennedy entertained his mistresses was paved over in 1970 by President Richard Nixon to create the James S. Brady Press Briefing Room, the very space where reporters now question the president's official conduct. The official narrative presented to visitors and the public meticulously omits any mention of these scandals. White House Historical Association guidebooks and official tours focus exclusively on the mansion's architecture, its collection of fine art, and its role as the setting for noble moments in American history, from Abraham Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation to state dinners for foreign dignitaries. There are no plaques acknowledging Nan Britton's presence or interpretive panels discussing the constitutional crisis of the 1990s. This curated silence is a form of institutional memory management designed to protect the dignity and symbolic power of the presidency. The history presented is one of idealized leadership and national grandeur, a sanitized version that deliberately severs the building from the complex, often messy human dramas that unfolded within its most private and powerful spaces, leaving visitors with an inspiring but profoundly incomplete picture. The broader impact of these scandals, particularly the Clinton affair, reverberated far beyond the White House gates, permanently altering the American political landscape. The controversy surrounding Kenneth Starr's investigation led directly to the expiration of the Independent Counsel Act in 1999. Congress, wary of what was now seen as unchecked partisan power, declined to renew the law. Academically, the scandals have become essential case studies in courses on constitutional law, executive privilege, and media ethics. Culturally, the events provided a deep well of inspiration for popular fiction, heavily influencing television shows like The West Wing and Scandal, which have shaped a generation's perception of Washington as a place of moral ambiguity and secret keeping. The scandals effectively stripped the presidency of its remaining mystique, solidifying a more cynical and adversarial relationship between the government, the media, and the public that persists to this day. The historical legacies of the presidents involved have been shaped, but not uniformly defined by these revelations. Warren G. Harding is consistently ranked by historians as one of the nation's worst presidents, his personal indiscretions now viewed as part of a larger pattern of poor judgment that included the rampant corruption of his administration. In contrast, Franklin D. Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy largely retain their esteemed positions. Their affairs, while now widely acknowledged, are often framed as private failings, secondary to their monumental public achievements in navigating the Great Depression, World War II, and the Cold War. William J. Clinton's legacy remains the most contested. His presidency is simultaneously remembered for its economic prosperity and peace, and for the indelible stain of impeachment. For him, the scandal is not a footnote, but a central chapter, forever complicating the assessment of his time in office, and proving that in the modern era, personal conduct can no longer be neatly separated from the public record. Ultimately, this hidden history of the White House reveals the profound tension between the symbolic perfection of an institution and the inherent imperfection of the individuals who inhabit it. These cases demonstrate how absolute power, combined with a fortress of privacy, can create an environment ripe for the abuse of that power, where the mechanisms of the state are repurposed to serve personal desires. The evolution from Harding's easily kept secrets to Clinton's globally televised crisis mirrors society's own changing demands for transparency and accountability from its leaders. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about how we preserve history and whether we should insulate our national symbols from the inconvenient truths of the past. It leaves us with a critical, unanswered question. Does a leader's private conduct diminish their public greatness, or can history accommodate both the monument and the man in all his complexities? The White House remains a powerful symbol of American democracy, its pristine facade projecting an image of unwavering integrity to the world. Yet, as this history reveals, its most private corridors have also served as a stage for the profound frailties of the men who held its highest office, a place where absolute power collided with intensely personal desires. This enduring tension raises a critical question that echoes through the decades. Do you believe these private actions were simply personal moral failings, or do they represent an unforgivable abuse of the public trust and the very power of the presidency itself? We invite you to share your perspective in the comments below. If deep dives into the complex and often uncomfortable truths behind our most revered monuments are what you seek, consider subscribing for more investigations that go beyond the official record. There are many more stories waiting to be told within these historic walls. Thank you for watching.